Hello again. Looks like I bought Daggerheart. Um, so I guess that's why I'm doing the video. Someone was asking, they wanted my thoughts on it. I think that they, again, like a lot of people are on the fence about buying new products. I don't know, you know, prices are going up and costs are going up, and people own a ton of games. You know, they say we're in the golden age of the tabletop role playing experience, and I believe that to be true. But I also think that we're starting to see, the diminishing returns where you can only own so many bookcases and so many books that you're not playing before it starts to weigh on you financially and cognitively. And so I think a lot of people are starting to, even if they can afford more stuff, it's to, they'd have to get rid of something to make room for something. And that kind of forces you to really kind of confront what you're buying. So I think in a lot of ways, people are at the point where they're starting to have to confront their overspending, their rampant overspending. So anyway, I'm not judging anyone who's asked me that question about my thoughts, but I think that a lot of people are kind of getting there, right? These deluxe box sets are only getting bigger, and I think a lot of people are moving to PDF because they're just running out of room at this point. So, what are my thoughts on Daggerheart? I've read it. I've watched a lot of reviews, and I have to say that I'm actually really surprised. A lot of I'm saying a lot right now, but a lot of reviewers don't know what to say. They don't know how to really interpret this book. I find a lot of OSR people are trying to do reviews about it, and they have a lot of negatives as well as some positives, but they seem very confused about what Daggerheart actually is. I'm not confused. I, I've taken a look at many different games before: Fate, Cipher, PBTA, Burning Wheel, all that kind of stuff. So again, I'm an academic and a scholar first. I'm a player and a GM second. So not much about this book really stood out to me as I won't use the word unique, but nothing was really a curveball. I do have some thoughts. I'm not going to really go over the mechanics of the game. I'm not going to go over like character creation. A lot of people already know all about that. I kind of want to really talk about this crux that people have with understanding the game, and why some people from D&D 5e will migrate towards this game and some won't. I don't know what the number is. I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm going to give you an outline essentially about the design principles behind Daggerheart and why I think it creates a certain type of game that doesn't really appeal to certain types, but appeals more to others. Okay, so let's just kind of get into it then, because I'll just kind of talk myself into circles. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into the book here. Yeah, beautiful book, beautiful art, blah, 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 blah. I'm actually not a big fan of the art. It has some areas where there's like a lot of detail and then it becomes very obfuscated. Fingers aren't always fully or well defined. I'm not saying that it mimics AI art in any way, but it has that kind of feel to it where, the fingers pull back a little too far, a little, and the art kind of shifts in different ways. Like it's very clear and very vivid and bright here, and then again the face here kind of fades, and it uses a lot of like the same palette, like this gold, brown, whatever palette, and it washes out the color. And then you have ones where the color kind of brightens and jumps out. You have ones that are this much more kind of, I don't know how to describe this art per se, but the art feels like it changes. See, this is vibrant and clear, and then this is washed out and purpled, right? So you get a lot of these juxtapositions between, there must be the different artists, and some of the artists I really like where it's vibrant, it jumps out and there's some clarity, and then others where it kind of obfuscates the art with speckling and things like that, where there's like a low detail to it, or there's an overlay on it on top of it. So for me, the art isn't, I mean, the cover, whatever artist did the cover, I love. But clearly there's a different artistry going on throughout the book. So I won't get into the the aesthetics of it. A very well made book, well put together, two whatnots, the whole 9 yards. High quality book. Everything's kind of contained in here as a core kind of book. It's got the partial bestiary, partial setting book, partial DMG, partial PHB. And I think that's really interesting because it's very well contained. And a lot of things that are being sold today are modular, right? They want you to buy these 3 books. I mean, if you take a look at Nimble, it's in 3 books, or really only needs to be 1. So it's like, but why 3 books? So it becomes very wasteful. And a book like this kind of goes against the grain. It's like all you need is that 1 book, and you don't even need the cards. And that's another thing entirely. I think they added the cards just, the whole space is, in my opinion, is really moving in that direction. I won't get into it again. That's a completely separate video. I think they're just jumping on to that bandwagon, giving the manipulative something for people to hold in their hands, but it's actually really unnecessary. Page 4 is almost all you need to read about this game to understand what it is and where it's going. Okay. I'm going to start this by saying that I think that Daggerheart is a very competitive, if not one of the best, tabletop narrative role-playing experiences. It's a really great RPE. I think the problem that a lot of these reviewers are coming into is they see this as an RPG. They see this as a role-playing game. And Daggerheart is not. It is not a role-playing game. And I don't think that's a negative. I don't think people should say, oh, it's a game. Who cares, right? We're talking about definitions here. And Zimmerman and I think it's, Salen and Zimmerman, early 2000s already kind of defined what a game is. You can go back, you can take a look at it. They wrote an article, a book, Rules of Play, Game Design Fundamentals, and they have several essential elements that a game has to have. One of the essential elements, and this is a crux of gaming, is a quantifiable outcome. What that means is there's a pass and fail state. There's an end where you win or you lose. And people say, well, it's a role-playing game. You're role-playing. There's no winning or losing. And that's not true. OSRs are very well laid as games. Something like Blades in the Dark has mechanics specifically designed to move people towards a fail state. And if they don't perform adequately, they will fail. Okay. Now, if you don't perform adequately, or however you want to define these things, getting into the definitions is not really part of what this is, although I know I'm kind of getting into it. This game does not drive people towards a fail state. The dice rolls, the mechanics are very obfuscating of this idea that you move towards it. And the reason why, even on just page 4 here, it talks about how the GM, the Daggerheart also utilizes an asymmetrical design, meaning that it plays differently for the GM than it does for the players. The players get a 2d12 system, the GM gets a d20. The players always start first in combat. The GM has to wait to kind of take it away from them to highlight other things. There are many mechanics in the game and in the book that refresh, to mitigate damage, refresh your health, and bring back some of your armor, and hold on to some of your hope points. And you start with hope points and things refresh completely when you sleep. The GM has to get those fear points from the dice rolls of the players. They need to roll in order to empower him to do something. And as you read more and more of this book, you realize that, especially here, right here, again, heart of the game, there is no winning or losing in Daggerheart in the traditional gaming sense. It literally admits that it's not a game. The game is a collaborative storytelling experience where the goal is to play out an incredible story together. You know, if you said to someone, what's the point of the game? Well, the point of the game is to tell an incredible story. They'd say, okay, but like, how do you play? You know, because again, it's a role-playing experience. It's not a game. There are dice, there are numbers, but it's very mathematically weighted towards success. And this is a complaint that people have of PBTA games and a lot of narrative-first games. There's a lot of obfuscated concepts that save players. If you take a look at Dungeon World 2 that's in production now, it's at the point where, as far as their current rules and how they've portrayed them, when the game goes to print, if it doesn't change seriously from what it is, the way that someone dies in the game requires player permission. So if there's a state with which the player would reach 0 or would normally die or go unconscious, the GM cannot continue whatever logical narrative process is going on if the player rejects death. If they say, okay, well, they deal you the final blow, do I have permission to kill you? Or do I have permission to end your character's life? The player can say, nope. Nope. I think that there's more for me to do in the story. You find a way. Find a way. And the game master has to find a way to let them live. And you'll find that there's this transfer of power from a game master towards players. And that's the same here in Daggerheart. There's a big shift of power towards the players to drive the story, control the story. And you see more player-facing roles and player-facing control and player-facing power. And it's not so much of a struggle, right? It's not a negative, but it's moving more towards this collaboration where the GM isn't someone who points the direction towards the story where there's a quantifiable outcome. In an OSR, you might go into a dungeon that's a deadly dungeon, and you would say, well, we either TPK or we don't, right? I mean, did you lose or did you win? They'd say, well, you know, we all of our characters died and all the gold and everything's left and we didn't get out, so we lost, we failed. And they would say that. In a narrative game like Daggerheart, that doesn't happen. It's designed mechanically for it not to happen. It's designed as part of its gaming principle not to happen. You would never have a TPK in Daggerheart. You would never have someone have this great story planned out, and Matt Mercer got this great, oh, it's gonna be great, and then like everybody dies, and Matt's like, okay, break. We do commercial break. That's never going to happen. But this game is designed for that. It's designed for, if you watch Umbra or Umbrella or whatever their new one is, I think there's only 2 or 3 episodes. If you watch it, I mean, that's what it's for. It's for that cinematic storytelling game, right? And that's why when it talks about the amount of players it's suggested, it suggests that the game is for 3 to 6 people. Now, it includes the GM as part of that 3 to 6. That's very telling, by the way, for this. It's a collaboration at the table. This is a table game. It says 2 to 5 players, but early on when it talks about it, it says it's for 3 to 6, right? Because it includes the GM as part of that team, right? And it's interesting that it doesn't include this idea of one-on-one. That there's this aspect where you have the GM, you have a player, and then you need another player. It's designed to have this interplay between 2 PCs. And yeah, you're interacting with the GM, but you really need that interaction between 2 people or more. So, I mean, as far as quantifiable outcomes, Daggerheart doesn't have that. It's about whether or not the story is going well or whether or not people are enjoying the story. So what is the fail state? There is none, right? I mean, it says the rules state that there's no winning or losing in Daggerheart. Again, page 4. There's no winning or losing in Daggerheart. You know, if you're having fun, you know what I mean? You've already won. You're already won as long as everyone's enjoying the story, because it's a performance piece, right? It's a role-playing experience, right? It's an RPE, not an RPG. And so a lot of people have that problem. So the 2D12 is very innovative in the sense that it includes with it the hope and the fear, and that in particular is not innovative. I mean, PBTAs use 2D6 to smooth the bell curve and to provide a gradient where there is fail with a benefit, pass with a consequence, and pass. And you see this gradient, right, where you use 2 dice, but you actually have 5 possible outcomes, and that aren't tied to the math per se, right? And you also have the hope and fear that have nothing to do with the mechanical outcome of the dice. Hope and fear generate parts of the story and the narration. They're like meta currencies as you might define them. That's the loose definition people are working on. But it has inlaid within these 2D12 more than just the mechanics of the dice. And that's something where the hobby needs to go to. There's not enough of this. You know, we have extra dice. We have things like The Walking Dead, where you have the black dice and the red dice. Okay, they're color coded. You have PBTA, where you have gradients of success or failure throughout the dice conclusions, and you get that better bell curve. But for something like this, what is interesting and what's needed to be done is you need to do more with less dice. People are always looking to reduce dice, and they're always looking to do more with dice in the game. You know, advantage and critical and explosion dice and blah, 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 blah. Look, there's ways where you can color code dice that have important, impactful mechanics to the game, where the colors on the dice and which one rolls higher or lower has nothing really to do ultimately with the ultimate success or the ultimate failure, but have an added benefit towards the mechanic of the game. So the 2D12 has inlaid within it not just the actual mathematical outcome. It includes the PBTA gradients, but it also includes another mechanic that has 2 possible outcomes that power different parts of the system. That is the innovation that this hobby needs, and it's something that nobody's going. So Daggerheart, probably never going to play it. Not my cup of tea. I'm not an RPE player because, again, people that are in the OSR, they want quantifiable outcomes. They want to be able to fail. They don't want to be handheld. Yes, story's important, but that comes like losing and failing or succeeding, whatever. That to them, that is part and parcel to the story. But what grinds their gears the wrong way is this asymmetrical design. It's the design. The design of Daggerheart is not for them. It's not to create a game itself. It's to create a storytelling experience. Now, I could go through here and talk about golden rules and things like that, but there's other elements of PBTA you see here that we have on. We have the subclasses that have the 2. I think they're domains is what they're called, right? So here we have. They all inlay 2 different domains per one, right? It's very much like Magic the Gathering on the back of the card, where you have white connected to green and blue. And so there's these 2 paired elements that go into each one of those classes. And what it suggests here is to avoid overlap. If anything, try to avoid anyone that overlaps on anyone else's domains. And even if you do overlap on domains, try to make sure there's only one overlap. And even if there is one overlap, try to make sure you don't pick the same cards. The whole point of this is very similar to the concept of PBTA playbooks, where you want the thief, you want the wizard, you want the blank and the blank. You don't want 3 wizards and a fighter or 2 clerics. They don't want that at all, because that attacks the narrative experience. It attacks the storytelling, because people don't shine as much, right? They don't stand out as much to be that unique. And as you see throughout this, you get to like literally pick your essentially what we call skills, right? you get to pick your experiences, right? And the experiences, you get to kind of label them yourself, right? You also get to choose how your guy really looks. Like you might be an elf, you might be a frog, but you could be a glowing frog, or you could be a frog with a third leg, or you could be a frog that has glowing eyes, or you kind of float off the... Anything that's not impactful in the game, you can literally just make stuff up. Now, in 5th edition, you would need something like traits or, cantrip that's on permanently and all this stuff. And that's why in 5th edition, they make so many classes. They make so many sort of races or ancestries. There's so many more. We need a dog with wings, and we need a dog that has teeth with a tail. And how does that all work? So people to find their uniqueness. The way that Daggerheart deals with it, it's like, okay, we're giving you some stuff here, but you can just do whatever you want. Like, does floating half an inch off the ground really matter? I mean, if traps still affect you by floating an inch off the ground, and that's the rule the gym's going to go with, who cares that you're floating an inch off the ground? This is like prehensile tails in like as far back as 3rd edition, where you can have a tail that has visual but not functional, right? Because if it's functional, it breaks the game. If it's visual, then hey, that's great, it's awesome, it's storytelling. So what Daggerheart does is it tries its best to pull away all of these boundaries and requirements that stop you from creating these beautiful, energetic, fun, cinematic creatures and abilities and things, and tries to keep in whatever rules are absolutely essential. And when it does like health and armor, it's trying to mitigate one shots and all that kind of. It's really trying to slow down and treat combat more as a crawl and a tick towards success than it is outright downing people and losing people, because that's uncontrollable. It's hard for the GM to control that in the game, and they need to really dial it down so that the GM, when it has fear and can use it, they can use a very beautiful, impactful, cinematic, crazy attack, whoa, but nobody's going to actually be critically harmed by it. So it's literally theatrical. And so for something like OSR, they might not like that because it's theatrical and not all that meaningful. Okay. And there's spells and powers that drag it out and refresh your stuff and recover a hope and, negate damage and downsize damage and refresh arm and refresh this and refresh strain. And there's so many tool sets for the players to drag out a combat. And yeah, they do try to streamline it. But if you watch Umbra, I think their very first combat, which is just against a couple of skeleton, lasts 30, 35, somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes. That's a normal low-end combat. And it lasts so long because it's dragged out. It is dragged out. And they get rid of things like initiative, and there's a lot of things they used to speed it up, but you actually lose a lot of that savings through the narration, because players have to narrate. So just listening to them fire an arrow is like a 3-minute montage, right? Whereas in D&D, you might just roll the dice and you're like, okay, I missed, go. Okay. And those are two different types of players, right? RPG versus an RPE. Now, D&D is still on the question block, right? Like something like Blades in the Dark has mechanics that drive you towards failure. Daggerheart has mechanics that pull everything away towards the story and obfuscates or gets rid of the quantifiable outcome. In something like D&D 5e, the GM has the choice to make it narrative or the choice to make it a game state with failure, and based on what rules they use and how they run their table. So, I mean, 5e is not immune to this, but what Daggerheart is doing is taking those people that generally pull towards the narrative experience and not so much the game element, and they said, let's just take that and move it over and get rid of that clutter that's part of the game, the fail state, and let's just really focus on the narrative experience. Okay, let's not play any games. We know what we are, let's just do it. And so Daggerheart's not confused. Okay, this book is not confused about what it is. It does what it wants very well. It has that PBTA kind of playbook, don't step on the toes of my character, of what they can and can't do. And so the characters are a bit simple. Like the cards have some simple abilities. You don't get tons of them, right? But it doesn't want more, it wants less, right? To fulfill what it needs to do. So is Daggerheart faster? I don't really think so. Is it a game? I think it's putting its foot firmly outside of that and saying, you know what? We're not playing the game of being a game anymore. We know what we are. We know what we're doing. And a lot of PBTAs are trying to do that with what they do. And they get bogged down with a lot of rules. I think what Daggerheart's doing is like, hey, let's take what works from the 5th edition, what makes it, fun, that people want, the color, the creatures, the characters, and things like that, the skills, and said, but let's get rid of the rest. And that's what Daggerheart is. Now, is that a bad thing? I don't think so. I think it's very clear what it is. Okay. I think that people need to make a decision what they are. The problem that I find, because people say, is this a 5e killer? I think the answer is definitely no. Because again, I think it's only really siphoning off a portion of the people that are really using 5th edition for that. Or they see the Critical Role and then want to emulate it. Here's the problem that I see. Daggerheart is very good at setting up the emulation that Mercer wants. This was quite clearly architecture based on Mercer, and it was developed by other people using ideas from other games. And Mercer would ultimately, check mark or cross off what he thinks would work, and then a process of eventually he can kind of pull away because it's moving in the direction that he wants. And his team was chosen very specifically, you can tell. But what it does is it does very good at emulating what you see in the show. I mean, even on page 4, again, it talks about how they want the miniatures, they want the sets, but they don't want to measure. Not really. That whole near, close, far. It's like, that bogs it down. I don't care if it's 12 inches versus 12 and a half. I don't care if it's 4 squares versus 5 squares. I just want a little ruler that's fast and easy. Done. Measure done. Because we need to get back to the story. Guys, that's just numbers and mechanics. Oh, God, guys, who cares? We just want to tell a story, right? We only need enough measuring and mechanics to make it feel like there's meaning behind the numbers, right? And it's not that there's zero meaning. Again, within this book, you could TPK people if you wanted to, but I'm telling you right now, any group that gets TPK'd in Daggerheart, that, ladies and gentlemen, was part of the story arc. Okay, it wasn't an accident. Nobody goes online and says, oops, I accidentally... And even if they did, they have provisions in the gym area. It was like, yeah, okay, yeah, it's okay to retcon. It's okay to go back. It's okay, go back, retcon. It's part of the story. Okay, they were meant to die. They're gonna wake up in hell, or whatever you want to call it, right? Hades. Okay, and the story continues. Umbra's not ending on the 3rd episode because of TPK. That's not how it works. But they want to be able to bring in the sets. They want to be able to move miniatures because it's fun to watch and fun to move. They want to roll dice because it's fun to roll dice and narrate it and have this really quick thing. But also then it becomes kind of bogged down with the other things. But this is here to emulate that cinematic experience. And if that's what you want, you're like, you know what? Numbers are kind of important and rolling dice is fun, but I never really liked the TPK. It gets out of hand. It's swingy. It's dangerous. It ends stories. It makes it my job harder. Just if you're that GM that just wants to more railroad and just tell the story, then Daggerheart's for you. Now, that gets in that whole, Mercer railroady, is it scripted kind of thing. Not going to get into that. But if we're talking about the two kind of dynamics on how to play D&D 5e, about how, stuff can happen randomly and you plan for just and only literally the next session, or this one has some grand arcs and you're going to find ways to kind of make it fit no matter how much railroady you want to call it, then that's the people that Daggerheart is for. It's harder to kill people. It's easier to mitigate, but it's for narration. It's supposed to give you that room and time to breathe. What happens though in combat is that because there is really no fail state, and the GM's not going to allow it, and the rules make it extremely difficult to enter a fail state, that combats are not win or lose, life or death. They are play until we eventually win. And that's what I kind of noticed in some of the Umbra combats, especially the first one. Maybe it's easier to obfuscate it as you get more experience, but combats are not meaningful in the mathematical academic sense. They're only meaningful in the narrative experiential sense, which means you eventually have to win, and you're just kind of dragging it out until you do, and that becomes a 30-40 minute exercise anyway. And that says it again too in the book. Like if you go to like the 140s, right, these are GM principles, right, and it talks to you about how to move things along quickly, right. Cut to the action. And essentially, if things are slowing down or bogging down, jump in, jam, do something. Something falls from the roof and destroys those 2 skeletons, and the combat's over. Now, I'm being facetious, but that's essentially what it's telling you to do. Keep skipping to the narrative beats at all costs. And for like an OSR or people who are more interested in the rules or succeeding or failing based on the fate of dice and stuff like that, that grinds them the wrong way. So that's what Daggerheart is. I don't think it's confused. I think reviewers are confused. Hopefully knowing what Daggerheart is helps you a lot more in choosing it. Hey, is Daggerheart the one for you? Because again, there's a lot of people doing this type of narrative experiential piece, and this is really the best example of taking that 5e dynamic and moving it like 3 steps towards being that heavily narrative. It still could go a little bit further, and there are games that do, and trust me, they are pushing it as far as, again, I don't think Daggerheart is a game, but those ones are on their face, not games. At least Daggerheart, you might want to move the goalpost on what a game definition is. No matter how far you move that, they're not going to qualify. Okay, so hopefully it's for you. Let me know what you think. Take care.